Pokemon Colosseum has always been that weird stepchild when it comes to Pokemon, along with that other GameCube game. They weren't made by Game Freak, aren't technically considered main series Pokemon games, and were never re-released or even digitally released on any other console besides the GameCube, yet still have connectivity with the Generation 3 Pokemon games, allowing players to trade Pokemon from Colosseum to a Generation 3 game. It features battles solely of the doubles variety in the main story, and yet is still beloved among Pokemon fans despite being 22 years old now. In this video, we'll be doing a Professor Oak's challenge of Pokemon Colosseum, meaning we have to catch, purify, and evolve every single possible Pokemon we can get in this game before each key boss fight, and this will include Ho-Oh at the very end, which takes a very long time to get in Pokemon Colosseum. Now, in a Professor Oak's challenge, you must get every obtainable Pokemon before the next gym leader or before any key fight in this game, which means in yellow version, for example, we had to train a Pidgey all the way to level 36 to evolve into a Pidgeot to get that Pokedex entry so we can then fight the first gym leader in Brock, which caused a lot of damage that I'm still not over yet. Now, Pokemon Colosseum is all about Shadow Pokemon though. In case you're unfamiliar with Shadow Pokemon, I'll explain more as we go on, but essentially Shadow Pokemon are evil Pokemon used by trainers that we can steal in battle, then purify to return to normal. Shadow Pokemon have some quirks to them we'll run into later on as well, but for now, let's start up a brand new save file in Pokemon Colosseum and catch every possible Pokemon in the game. There are 63 Pokemon to obtain, which might not seem like a lot, 64 I guess if you count a special surprise at the end, but getting all of these Pokemon will still take a ton of time, especially since we're playing on official hardware with no speed up or any other shenanigans. Wow, that's a lot of money. Starting off the game, I name ourselves Oak as the guy that we're following by Mulax suggests. This character's name canonically is West, but you probably didn't know that since the Pokemon Company never acknowledges that this game ever existed, much like how they never acknowledge me to send me cool stuff. The intro cutscene shows us breaking out of an exploding building while riding a motorcycle. Red could never do something as cool as this. We used to be evil and work for Team Snag'em, an evil team that makes machines to allow them to steal Pokemon, snag them even, and also turn them into Shadow Pokemon to unlock their unlimited power or some weird crazy lore story like that. We stole one of their Snag'em machines to allow ourselves to steal back these Shadow Pokemon and then purify them and free them once and for all. Since we're technically an outlaw, I don't really know if we're considered an outlaw, I guess, if we're just breaking out of an evil organization, but since we have bad guys trying to find us and do bad things to us, we go right to the outskirts stand, which looks straight out of Cowboy Bebop. Actually, a lot of this game looks like it came right out of Cowboy Bebop, as there's no wild Pokemon, and this whole place is just a giant wasteland, with us sort of just being a bounty hunter tracking down these Shadow Pokemon. The outskirts stands also happens to be the only place in the entire game we can buy Pokeballs, so we'll return here a few times in our journey. For now, though, we have a quick tutorial against Ryder Willy. Ryder what now? I hardly know her. Since this game is double battle focused, Willy has two Zigzagoons, something that's rather fitting given recent events on this channel, to our starter Pokemon, Espeon and Umbreon. I love these evolutions so much, with Espeon being my all-time favorite evolution, but because they're already purified and don't evolve, we can add 2 to our whiteboard total and then box them as soon as we get some more Shadow Pokemon. As for the tutorial part of this game, that's basically it. A quick cutscene, a TV broadcast, a quick battle, and that's about it. We don't have a dozen cutscenes explaining the lore or an hour-long tutorial where we have to go to school. We just go straight to gaming, exactly how it should be. From here, we can ride our motorcycles over to Phoenix City. As there are no wild Pokemon in Colosseum, there also aren't any routes in the game, and the game mostly takes place in cities or buildings. It's a bit different from a traditional Pokemon game, and Colosseum isn't a stranger to doing things differently, like introducing us to our partner throughout the game by showing her being carried in a body bag by these two goons. Considering that we can't even have slot machines in Pokemon games anymore, then we sure can't have whatever the heck this kidnapping is supposed to be. We save her and give her the name of Agatha as the guide recommended, and the reason why she was being kidnapped was because she has the unique ability to see Shadow Pokemon. When a Pokemon is turned into a Shadow Pokemon, the gates to their heart is closed off, and Agatha can somehow see that with this weird cutscene where she just kind of stares and we zoom in on her face. It's a lot like this. We'll see this power firsthand very shortly, but for now we need to find the mayor to let him know about the Shadow Pokemon and how Team Snag'em is using them for evil. The mayor is named Escade, or Escade, which is just the first of many very weird names used in Pokemon Colosseum. The mayor tells us to check out the town's Colosseum challenge, but unfortunately we get there too late and can't enter it. Then we have a run-in with some of these Team Snag'em goons who tell us more about how the snagging machine works. Then Agatha suggests that we go buy some Pokeballs so we can utilize it properly, as the device allows Pokeballs thrown by it to be used to catch trainers' Pokemon, but we'll only be using it against Shadow Pokemon to then purify them. After purchasing some Pokeballs in the outskirts stands, we return to the mayor's house and find some more bad guys. We got some standard goons here, the Power Rangers apparently, and then of course the infamous Mirror B himself. He's part of the reason why this game is so beloved, and then we fight some of his goons. One of his goons, named Trudely, has a Shadow Makuhita. Actually, his full name is Mirror B Peon Trudely, and I'd much rather not see Mirror B do that on anybody, especially Trudely, but here we can see Agatha use her powers to tell us that Makuhita is a Shadow Pokemon, so we have to snag it. After we capture our first Shadow Pokemon, chat then suggests that I draw a Mirror B on the whiteboard that I have behind me to track our encounters, since we had a lot of dead space at the top. Now I stream pretty much all of my gameplay for these videos live on my Twitch channel, link in the description, to ensure that they're done legit and on actual hardware, as you can see from the GameCubes on screen right now. While the circle I drew for the afro on Mirror B came out to be absolutely immaculate, one of the best circles I've ever drawn in my entire life, he looked a lot more like a Diglett with an afro rather than looking like Mirror B. Look, I'm not much of an artist in that regard, and I tried my best, so if going out of my way to purchase a whiteboard and try my best to draw the Colosseum logo and Mirror B doesn't deserve a like, I don't know what does. Then right before leaving Phoenix City, we can fight one of the 3 Power Ranger looking guys we saw with Mirror B. They each have a different middle evolution Johto starter Pokemon we can pick from, so I choose to fight Bluto and take his Croconaw because it evolves sooner than Quilava and it's just stronger and easier to use than Bayleaf. Chikorita just kinda always gets the short end of the stick. Sorry, buddy. Although I did get a shiny Chikorita in my Soul Silver Shiny Badge quest, that's pretty cool. It's one of my favorite shinies when it comes to the base form starters, even though it kinda sucks in battle. I even have this Croconaw plush in my setup behind me that happened to be peering over the whiteboard as we played, so it seemed rather fitting as well. Now that we have 2 Shadow Pokemon, we pretty much never have to use Espeon and Umbreon ever again, so we'll box them once we get a full team of Shadow Pokemon. It's best to focus on using the Shadow Pokemon in battle when trying to purify them, since battling with them helps lower their heart gauge, and we need this purple bar under their HP to be empty before we can purify them in a village that we'll go to later on. For now though, we have to go to Pyrite Town after making a quick stop at the construction lot. Surely nothing nefarious is being built in this shady construction lot in the middle of nowhere. Pyrite Town is where most of the action in this game happens. We have this cool jazzy theme in this steampunk-esque town filled with bad guys. Not everyone here is bad though, like Duking, who isn't exactly doing a good job as mayor, even though he's kind of like a pseudo-mayor and not the official mayor. He runs the Colosseum in this town too, which are sort of like gyms in this game, but not really, as most of the Colosseums are optional. While the Professor Oak's challenge requires you to get every single Pokédex entry possible before each gym fight, as there are no gyms in Colosseum, we're making each key boss fight act as the requirement instead of gyms, with our very first fight being against Mirror B later on. There's plenty of Pokemon to catch until then, like all the trainers in Pyrite Town we can even rebattle later if we need to. Here we see another Ryder Nover, no thank you, but in this case he has a Noctowl that we snag and then the next trainer has a Flaffy. Since we have a decent bit of Shadow Pokemon by now, I should probably explain Hyper Mode a little bit, which happens to a Shadow Pokemon sometimes during battle. Let's bring up Professor Tree to explain it better than I could. Greetings trainers, I am Professor Tree here to explain some Shadow Pokemon mechanics to you, more specifically Hyper Mode. Whenever a Shadow Pokemon is sent into battle, they have a chance to enter Hyper Mode, and they have a higher chance of entering Hyper Mode if you go for a Shadow Pokemon move. Every single Shadow Pokemon has a move called Shadow Rush, which is a very strong typeless move that has some recoil damage. It's one of the best moves in the entire game in Pokemon Colosseum that we utilize a lot while going through this game, and since Shadow Pokemon don't gain any EXP or levels while they're Shadow Pokemon, having a powerful move offsets that a little bit, and it also helps us lower their heart gauge, which is very, very useful, especially if we call them while they're in Hyper Mode in battle. Calling a Pokemon in Hyper Mode gets rid of Hyper Mode, but it lowers their heart gauge, which is very important. Each Shadow Pokemon reacts to battles and Hyper Mode differently, something that C didn't realize until later on in the game, and we'll discuss more about that later on. This is so sad, but I have to erase my beautiful drawing just for the video. Unfortunate. Thank you, Professor Tree, for that beautiful explanation, but for now we have a few other Shadow Pokemon to save, like Skiploom, Quagsire, Mischievous, and Slugma. Balls aren't really an issue, since I bought so many, and these Pokemon aren't really too difficult to catch. With 10 Pokemon captured, you might also notice that the Pokemon at the start of the game are a pretty high level, especially compared to main series Pokemon games. Everything is in the mid-20s to even 30, meaning we don't have to spend nearly as much time grinding, especially very early on. Luckily for us, we don't have to grind at all in the first section since we can't even purify our Pokemon until after the first fight against Mirror B. This means we won't have to spend 16 hours grinding a Pidgey However, this game still requires a fair bit of grinding, not only with leveling, but also with purifying our Pokemon, and Pyrite Town will be one of the main places for grinding and purifying once we gain experience, so we better get used to it. That's all the encounters in the center of the city, so now we have to head to Pyrite Colosseum where we learn about Kale, a sketchy guy who has shadow Pokemon. He pops up a few times in the story, and to be honest, I don't even fully understand the story of Pokemon Colosseum or all of the characters and all that, so I won't focus on it too much, but there's a lot of weird side characters like Kale. We'd fight him and snag his shadow Furret, which was just walking about. Then he tells us about some evil guys in a nearby building. The game then just pans over to the building where we see Mirror B talking to this Final Fantasy looking villain named Nasquor. Yeah, the names in this game are really weird, who seems to be the big bad main evil dude of this game. We make our way towards that building, but first we find a scientist who just collapses in front of us. We head into that building and find more collapsed people and learn of a guy named Silva who stole a very important part, causing the city to lose power. I don't know why so many Pokemon games have something to do with losing power and power plants, but at least the PC still works, so we can use that. We need to find a special part that was hidden so we can restore power in Pyrite, and it can be found in the sketchy construction lot we visited earlier, which doesn't make it seem even sketchier than before. Then we return it, restoring power to Pyrite Colosseum so we can finally take it on. Apparently Silva isn't evil and did this because he thought it was right or whatever, but let's just take on the Colosseum for now. In hindsight, I don't know if I had to even do this, but I did it anyway and it also helped purify our Pokemon a little bit. Colosseums in general are a good opportunity to train your Pokemon, get money, and get some rewards like TMs. We'll use them more later on, but after battling the Pyrite Colosseum, we head into the building where Mirror B was earlier, and have to fight a ton of peons on our way to fight Mirror B. The building we're in now is one of the Evil Team hideouts, yet there is another area on the map called Snag'em Hideout, which confused me a lot later on. But now we're fighting Cypher, technically, which is a little different than Team Snag'em, but they're both evil and work together. Honestly, again, I still don't fully understand it despite playing through this game like 3 times now. Anyway, the first shadow Pokemon we find here is a Yanma, then a Remoraid. For some reason, Remoraid's only level 20, which was much lower than other Pokemon in this area of the game, so we spend quite a lot of time leveling it up after purifying it. Another annoying thing in this game was healing and saving too. There isn't a place to heal in this hideout area, but we can heal by depositing Pokemon on the PC and then withdrawing them again. We also have to rely on the PC to save the game, as we can't save freely wherever we are like you can in other Pokemon games in the main series. It was tedious, and we spent a lot of time backtracking to heal or save the game. We needed to save before each Shadow Pokemon encounter as well, since if you fail the encounter, you can't find that Shadow Pokemon again until the post-game in most situations. It's a good thing I saved often though, since I failed a Mantine encounter in this hideout on the first attempts. After we get the Mantine, we save Silva, and then Mirror B FaceTimes us telling us that he's hiding in a cave with Duking's Plusle that he stole. Mirror B wasn't the only guy hiding out in a cave in 2003, so on our way to find him, we find Hunter Dokkan and take his Quillfish, then head to the cave to find Mirror B. Kinda weird how going up a building leads us into a cave, and I don't know why Mirror B is just hanging out there waiting for us instead of fleeing the scene, but at least it means more Shadow Pokemon for us to rescue. This includes Meditite, which has some of the best animations in this entire game. I wish the animations had this much personality in, say, Scarlet and Violet on the Switch, instead of Pokemon just sort of standing there and bobbing around all the time, as some of these animations in Colosseum are just completely over the top. But the other 2 Pokemon here are Dunsparce and Swablu, which are all the Pokemon we need for this part of the game until we fight Mirror B. We don't have access to Purification yet, so we don't need to worry about fully healing and evolving our Pokemon yet, allowing us to go right towards Mirror B's room. The cave at least has some healing stations and PCs for us to use to save the game, to save us a bit more time, but I spent about 2 hours in this cave alone. Eventually we find the room that Mirror B is in, and I'm sorry, am I interrupting something here? Mirror B really likes Ludicolo, if you couldn't tell, so much so that he has multiple on his team. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a Shadow Ludicolo though, which is a shame because I love Ludicolo. It even have this weird Ludicolo straw from 7-Eleven back when they were promoting the Detective Pikachu movie in 2019. At this point, I was leaning with Remoraid a lot since it's so low level and I just want its heart gauge to get out of the way ASAP, then focus on leveling it up later on. The battles at this point of the game weren't too difficult either, allowing me to focus on farming hyper modes in battle to purify our Pokemon faster, so unless we're facing a Shadow Pokemon, I could just spam Shadow Rush over and over again to lower our heart gauge. Shadow Rush does have an added bonus of having a higher critical hit chance when you're in hyper mode too, which Professor Tree forgot to mention earlier, and we can use that to our advantage sometimes if we don't need to call our Pokemon. Ludicolo are these adorable dancing pineapple tree duck things, but one of these Ludicolo is actually an imposter. You might look like a tree, but you're not nearly as vibey and cool as the other Ludicolo, and you happen to be a Shadow Pokemon. I still can't believe how people in the Pokemon world are fooled into thinking that this rock-type Pokemon Sudowoodo is a tree, but that's another Shadow Pokemon for us, and Mirror B down as we clear the first section of this Professor Oak's challenge. Another thing I noticed here was that no one seemed to care when I just straight up stole their Pokemon. I guess Shadow Pokemon are already stolen in the first place, so I'm just stealing a stolen Pokemon, but they rarely, if ever, acknowledge that I just caught one of their Pokemon and stole it. With Mirror B out of the way though, we can save Plusle, find this memo that teaches us more about Shadow Pokemon, add this Plusle to our Pokedex for Pokemon number 19, then save the game after 6 hours of playing during the first day of streaming this challenge. Day 2 is focused mostly on purifying Pokemon, but first we had to go to the Agate village, or Agate. No matter how I say it, somebody says I'm saying it wrong, and me just saying this will promote more people to say I'm saying it wrong. I'm just going to call it the village. But in the village, we meet Agatha's grandparents. Here we learn a bit more about purifying Pokemon and unlocking the gates to their heart from Agatha's grandfather, Egan. Just another weird name in Colosseum. He tells us how we can purify Pokemon at a special rock in a forest nearby, however there's some baddies guarding it that we need to beat first. Egan tries to stop them on his own with his lone Pikachu, but it isn't strong enough, so you have to take care of the Cypher Peon and snag his Hitmontop in the process. His name is Cypher Peon Scrub, and I don't know why Cypher pees on him, but he really was a scrub, as he went for water-type moves on our Mantine, which had the water absorbability, which just ended up healing it. Once all the peons are out of the way though, we learn how Pokemon are purified with the power of Celebi, or whatever. This game has a huge emphasis on Generation 2 and acted as a way to get many of the Generation 2 Pokemon back in Generation 3 when it was new, but I still don't fully understand how Celebi purifies Pokemon. I can see how Jirachi would do it hypothetically, doing a wish or whatever to unlock their hearts or whatever, which would also tie into the Generation 3 a bit more, especially when you consider the fact that the bonus disc allows you to get a Jirachi transferred over to your copy of Ruby or Sapphire, but then in Japan they give out Celebi instead of Jirachi. The Japanese version of Colosseum has some other cool features besides Celebi though, like e-reader exclusive Pokemon even, but I unfortunately can't do that on my American copy of the game, my American GameCube. I did manage to get a Celebi from the Japanese version of Colosseum onto my Emerald version through a convention last year though, and I will be needing that Celebi for a future video. The e-reader in Japan was just much more cooler, as we got like nothing in North America when it comes to the e-reader, and I don't even know why I still have this thing. I do love how playing on official hardware has tied together so many of my projects, but back to the gameplay, we spend a lot of time purifying and grinding up Pokemon on the second day of streaming this. Skiploom and Crocodile evolve right as we purify them, since if you use a Shadow Pokemon in battle, it'll gain some EXP once it's purified. It kind of like stores it and then waits until it's purified to actually use it. I then go to the Phoenix City Coliseum to level up some of our purified Pokemon and even evolve them, with the next Pokemon we end up evolving being Hariyama, then Altaria. Around this time, we also learn about how Mount Battle's under attack and we need to save it, but the next boss fight happens to be at Mount Battle as well, and we have some other Shadow Pokemon we have to purify and evolve before we can go there, so that can wait. On day 3, I continue grinding, get our Medicham, Octillery, and then finally, Magcargo. The Fennec Coliseum was basically our Diglett's Tunnel for this part of the game since we ended up grinding a lot of levels here, but we needed way less time grinding here, which was nice. One thing I really liked about doing the Professor Oak's challenge at Pokemon Colosseum is while there was a ton of grinding, most of the challenge just involved me playing the game and doing everything we possibly can do, rather than stopping after 20 minutes of gameplay to grind for endless hours, for playing for 20 more minutes and then grinding for hours again. This ordeal brought us to 29 total Pokemon to obtain as day 3 concluded, with day 4 being a longer day of playing Pokemon Colosseum. I noticed that Magcargo has Yawn too, so I added to the team tell with catching Shadow Pokemon, and it would be the unsung hero of this playthrough, overperforming and being a very valuable Pokemon. With everything evolved and purified, we can finally head into Mount Battle, where we could have grinded a little bit against the first 9 trainers, I guess, to save some time for the boss battle at fight number 10, but waiting to do it means we get more EXP on our other Pokemon, so it wasn't a bad trade-off. I know earlier I said that just using 6 Shadow Pokemon was the way to go, but since the battles get harder the farther we progress in the story and how Shadow Pokemon don't get any EXP, it is beneficial to have some non-Shadow Pokemon with you later on in the game that are a high enough level to handle other things that aren't Shadow Pokemon, kinda like what we're doing with Medicham and Macargo being in the back of our team. In Mount Battle, there's even a guy named Turo, and I wonder if he ends up being in Paldea later on. Then finally, at the 10th battle, we have the next boss. And it's not just any Kim, it's Da Kim, or Da Kim. I don't know how to pronounce his name, because the names of Colosseum are very strange. While he is only the second boss fight, he has an Entei. Seeing a legendary Pokemon this early on is a bit surprising, but our Macargo can help us catch by putting it to sleep with Yawn. Macargo ended up being a better fire type in this game all around than Entei, surprisingly, as in Generation 3, Entei really isn't that special. I mean, I guess it is special since all fire moves are special, but it's not great in Generation 3. I bought a ton of Ultra Balls specifically for this fight, and luckily I was able to buy 60 Ultra Balls using all of the money we won from going through Fennec Colosseum so many times earlier. Entei was still rather stubborn with being captured, and once we defeated Dakeem, we're given a key that we'll need in a future location and a Time Flute. Time Flutes are very useful items since they instantly open a Purify's heart gauge to fully purify them right away, but we'll save any Time Flutes we get for later encounters. At this point of the game, nothing besides Entei takes that long to purify, but you'd be surprised at which Pokemon end up taking the longest to purify. Now we can head into the Under, which is a hidden area under Pyrite Town, which isn't even sus at all. I wonder if Duking even knows about this place existing. After running some errands down here and meeting Net, we run into some guy with a Shadow Ledian that we snag after accidentally knocking it out first. We then save Silva after being kidnapped yet again, then prepare for the next key fight against Venus, one of the evil admins, and the most normal name we've seen so far outside of maybe Ryder Willie at the very start of the game. Venus has a Suicune, which is a bit of a pain to catch, but after we snag it, she just runs away and we need to chase her down. There are tons of Shadow Pokemon to snag along the way down these stairs, like Gligar, Stantler, Piloswine, and Sneasel. This eventually takes us to the Shadow Pokemon Lab, which of course, as the name suggests, has a lot more Shadow Pokemon, and this is where Shadow Pokemon are created. The Pokemon we get here include Aipom, Murkrow, Fortress, Ariados, Granbull, and Vibrava, with Vibrava being the only thing that we need to level up to evolve in this section of the game. Once clearing out most of the peons, they sound some sort of alarm to signify that we're there, but before we fight Ein, the evil scientist and the next key boss, we have to grind a bit back at Pyrite Town and get some evolutions and purifications going. We can't enter a Colosseum with Shadow Pokemon though, so Pyrite City in the center of the town battling against these random trainers is the best way to try to purify our Pokemon. Now you might see that we're at 42 Pokemon obtained already, which is 2/3 of the total you need and is much less than say Pokemon Yellow version, which required about double the amount of Pokemon. But trust me, this challenge still took many hours and really wasn't much quicker than Yellow version at all. Especially once you consider the fact that you have to get Ho-Oh, the 63rd Pokemon, which in itself took me an entire day of streaming just for that one Pokemon. We still have lots of grinding to do, and while grinding, someone in chat points out that we might have made an oopsie. But we accidentally forgot to purify Entei and Ledian before we fought Venus, which we were supposed to do as Venus was a key boss. I didn't even realize this since this section was so short with only 2 Pokemon we had to obtain, and neither of them even evolved. Even though neither of these Pokemon evolve, we are still supposed to do it for the challenge, and if you want to be super strict, I guess you could say I failed the Professor Oak's challenge on Colosseum by not purifying Entei and Ledian sooner, but I'm not starting over right now just to purify a Ledian and then Entei. I decided to just purify them in this section and then move on. Purifying all the Pokemon we just caught did take a while though, since not all Pokemon purify equally, and legendary Pokemon like Entei and Suicune just take much longer. At this point of the game, I still didn't fully understand purification and Shadow Pokemon mechanics, so I turned to Professor Tree to explain it to us more, and once learning more about it, that greatly cut the amount of time we needed to spend purifying Pokemon, now that I knew how to do it more optimally. Well, see, need me again for your video, don't you? While I may just have attended Slateport City University, I still learned quite a bit about Shadow Pokemon at my time at SCU, working with a lot of people that studied in the OR region. And honestly, it's really simple. If you look at a Pokemon's heart gauge, as I kind of drew it out here, again, limited colors, had to use blue when it should be purple. Purple markers just aren't in the budget yet. I'm sorry guys. But if you look at this blue or supposed to be purple bar, you'll notice that it's separated into 5 different sections. Now once these first 2 bars are empty, you can actually see what nature that Shadow Pokemon is, which is pivotal when it comes to purification. There are 5 main ways to purify Pokemon, which are Battle, Call, Walking, the Daycare, and Cologne. All of these methods will lower the heart gauge of a Pokemon, but some Pokemon like certain methods better. According to the Dragonfly Cave, How much a Pokemon likes each method ranges from horrible being the worst, then bad, normal, good, and then great being the best. This all depends on their nature, of course, and not every nature has a method that is considered great, however, like the hardy nature, for example, which prefers battle and walking being good, and then the daycare being horrible. The daycare is in the village, and Entei prefers it, so I use that for most of the heart gauge for Entei, but I have to pay a whopping 6,200 Pokédollars to get it back, making this method very expensive, especially at this point of the game. A more cost-effective method would be to buy colognes in Agate Village, or just the village I should call it because I'm never going to say it right, which purifies Pokemon a little bit, and some natures prefer that. Colognes will be more useful later on when we have more disposable money to work with, but since we're low on money, we mainly use battle and save a lot of time by having Entei in the daycare. As for walking, there is an exploit where you can just walk in this corner of the village and have your steps count, but that's kind of cheating, and C already broke one GameCube controller doing this challenge, so we shouldn't risk breaking another. Going forward, we'll reference this chart more, and C will link in the description so you guys can follow along if you're playing Colosseum on your own, but for now, let's turn it back to C. Knowing the best way to purify each Pokemon helps a ton, but all of this grinding took us to day 5. With everything purified, we focused on leveling up Vibrava into Flygon, and Flygon would turn out to be one of the best Pokemon for us in this game, being with us through the very end. Now we can return to the Shadow Pokemon Lab to fight Ein and snag his Raikou. We're so close to beating the main story now. Ein has a Rain Thunder strategy, making Raikou very difficult to catch, but if we save Magcargo then knock out everything else, we can send out Magcargo, go for Yawn on Raikou to put it to sleep, and then make it much easier to catch for Pokemon number 44 in our Pokedex. Actually, technically this game doesn't have a Pokedex, you just kind of take Pokemon and catch them, but still doing an Oak Challenge. Kind of weird, I know, but you guys voted for Colosseum, and I'm doing it. Following this legendary beast, the other two Pokemon we catch in this section are Sunflora and Delibird. Not nearly as exciting as Raikou, but that brings us to 46 total Pokemon. Sunflora and Delibird were found in the Railgim Tower, which was what was being built in the sketchy construction lot we visited earlier. It's a glamorous tower for the bad guys where we have to go through a lot of fights and find a lot of shadow Pokemon. Before we go there and fight the final boss though, I make sure to not do another oopsie, so I purify Raikou, Delibird, and Sunflora, then end day 5 ready to take on the rest of the tower on day 6. The Railgim Tower is sort of like the Elite Four for Pokemon Colosseum. We have to battle against 4 previous bosses, including Mirror B, who now only has 2 Ludicolo down from 4 previously. We also fight against Dakim, Venus, and Ein, collecting their ID cards which allow us to open the next gate to the next section of the tower. I also realized that Ein is the name of the dog in Cowboy Bebop, and this game in general gives off a lot of Cowboy Bebop vibes like I said earlier. None of those 4 trainers had Shadow Pokemon for us to get, so there isn't really much to say about those battles, aside from the fact that the difficulty really ramped up with the trainers having strategies and higher level Pokemon now. The game does try to offset your Pokemon being lower level by Shadow Pokemon having strong Shadow type moves, but even once they're all purified and even after grinding a fair bit, I still feel quite underleveled. Through the gate though, we fight another Cypher Peon with a Shadow Heracross that we snag, then have to fight against Gonzap before we proceed into the final area. Gonzap has a Shadow Skarmory, which is the first of 3 very difficult and strong Pokemon we need to catch and purify. The other 2 are coming up soon, but these 3 are tougher than the legendary beasts we had to face earlier in terms of purification. Skarmory doesn't really have too much to hit our Flygon or Magcargo, so we can resist its hits and slowly chip away at it before putting it to sleep and catching it. Since Gonzap is a boss, we have to go back and purify the 2 Pokemon we just captured. Skarmory took a fair bit of time to purify in this game, but we got a favorable nature at least and have a lot of money to buy colognes to make purification even faster on both of these Pokemon, to purify them both in about an hour. I haven't mentioned what our total playtime was for a while, but this whole ordeal took us to the end of day 6 where we had just over 26 hours played and a lot more to go even though we're at the final showdown of the game. There's a few peons we need to fight along the way before the next boss, and they have shadow Pokemon like Miltank, Absol, Houndoom, and Tropius. I really struggled in these fights against these peons since the level jump was so big, and also because they lead with random Pokemon every time, making it hard to prepare for each battle. This took quite a few attempts, and you might also notice some Fire Red gameplay in the corner by the way. Just ignore that for now, as that's part of a future project for my next video or possibly the video after that, since what I'm doing in Fire Red involved mostly just mashing A for a while, so I decided to do it on my brand new DS capture card while we played Colosseum to save as much time as I possibly can. Eventually though, we reach Nascor, who is assumed to be the final boss. He has a stacked team with Gardevoir, Blaziken, Dusclops, Natu, Walrein, and then his shadow Pokemon, Metagross. Xatu spams Confuse Rays, while Walrein has Ice Type moves for Flygon, and Blaziken can handle our Skarmory, making this a very difficult fight. It took a few attempts, and since I couldn't save before Nascore, if I lost a battle, I had to battle the previous 4 peons all over again, just without their shadow Pokemon since I already snagged them. I even took a break to purify all of the other Pokemon we had, since it was taking me so long to finally beat Nascore. It was a gauntlet, a Colosseum even, but eventually we get lucky and snag Nascore's Metagross. The worst part about this is that our teams don't get healed between each fight, so I had to purchase a lot of revives and potions beforehand to heal our team in battle, but at least Nascore was the final boss, right? Turns out we have one more fight right after Nascore against the true boss, Evice, aka Escade, the mayor of Phoenix City, who was in on the shadow Pokemon ploy all along. He tries to stop us once and for all, and his team is even better than Nascore's, with his ace Pokemon being Shadow Tyranitar, but we somehow got really lucky and got through him on the first try, catching his Tyranitar. The duo of Flygon going for Earthquakes, and then Skarmory just being really strong and being immune to Earthquake, then Magcargo in the back for Yawn really carried us at the end of the game. I had other Pokemon like Houndoom for some pesky grass types and a few fortresses, Granbull for the Intimidate ability, then Raikou for type diversity and Thunderbolts as well. That brings us to 54 Pokemon at the end of the main story of the game, and there's still more to go. First, I used the 2 Time Flutes we got on Metagross and Tyranitar to purify them in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail since they normally take the longest to purify. Then, while focusing on the other Shadow Pokemon, we have more Pokemon to catch. First, we go to the hideout and snag another Johto starter in Quilava. One of my favorite parts about this challenge is that I'll finally be able to have all of the Johto starters on a Generation 3 copy of the game once I beat this game and transfer them over to my copy of Emerald or Fire Red or whatever. That then ends day 7, and on day 8 of streaming this challenge, I prepared to get the last few Pokemon we needed before taking on the journey that was to get Ho-Oh. At this point of the game, we have to travel around a lot and rely on Net emailing us about Shadow Pokemon he spotted in the area, leading us to get a Bayleaf next, followed by Smeargle from Biden, which isn't shiny despite it having a red tail. Confusing, I know, since in the GBA game, Shiny Smeargle has a red-tipped tail. Shinies in general are weird in Pokemon Colosseum, since they don't exactly match what they look like on the GBA counterparts. Next, we track down Ursaring from Agrev, then we get Shuckle, which takes us a while to get for no particular reason. In order to get Shuckle in this game, you need to go through the Under Colosseum 5 times, then on your 5th try, in the final battle, you find a trainer with a Shadow Shuckle that you can capture. I don't know why they want us to go through all of this trouble just for a Shuckle, but after a few losses, Quilava purifies and evolves to Typhlosion, then we finally find Agnol and snag his Shuckle for Pokemon number 60. That means only 2 Pokemon left before Ho-Oh. The next Pokemon we need is a Togetic that we get from this imposter who looks just like us. He's attacking people with his Shadow Togetic like this weird kid that was chasing a castle around the fountain in Phoenix City, and for some reason, Togetic's only level 20 when the other Pokemon on his team are level 60+, and they say that Pokemon Gold and Silver has a bad level curve. Once getting the Togetic, we purify everything with mostly colognes, as at this point of the game we had quite a lot of money to spend on the cologne, so it didn't take too long. We evolved Bayleaf into Meganium, and with 62 of 63 Pokemon obtained, I end day 8 knowing that we will need all of day 9 to get the final Pokemon, Ho-Oh, and then a surprise 64th Pokemon that isn't technically in this game, but we can still get it. Look, getting Ho-Oh is super tedious, and you don't even get it in the regular story mode. The game doesn't even tell you how to get Ho-Oh or where to get it, so I don't even know how anybody found this out. What you need to do to get Ho-Oh in Pokemon Colosseum is go to Mount Battle, but not Mount Battle in the story mode. Mount Battle from the menu and battle through 100 battles, and once you beat the final boss, Ho-Oh will be added to your PC in the story mode. It sounds like a silly playground rumor because who is going to do 100 battles in a row without failing in a side mission that's not even part of the main story, and why would it transfer it to the main story save file? That makes no sense. On top of that, you can only use Pokemon that were once Shadow Pokemon while trying to get Ho-Oh, meaning we can't just sweep all of these trainers with Mewtwo or Rayquaza like I'm doing in Fire Red in the corner there. We can at least do single battles instead of double battles to make things a bit quicker, where we bring a party of 6 Pokemon but then only bring 3 Pokemon to each single battle. Throughout most of this, I just led with Flygon and destroyed everything with Earthquake, and had Tyranitar for extra power in the back and Skarmory for bulk, making our own little sand team, which was really fitting with the deserty landscape of the Ore region in Pokemon Colosseum. We need to get through 100 battles in a row without losing, but luckily after each flawless victory, which is where if you win without any of your Pokemon fainting, you get a free continue and you start off with 5 continues. Some of these early battles are laughably easy, and opposing trainers match the highest level of whatever Pokemon your highest level is, so you don't have to worry about being under-leveled too much. With that being said though, despite battling every trainer and grinding a lot throughout the main story, our highest level Pokemon is Skarmory at only level 62. I don't really think it's possible to get much higher than that, and Flygon and Tyranitar aren't too far behind 62. Then I brought Metagross because it's kinda bulky, Houndoom to handle any annoying Fortress, which a few of these trainers have, then Gramble for Intimidate. The vast majority of these battles were done using only our top 3 guys, with most of the time being led by Flygon. Every 10 battles we fight against a leader, but the first 80 or so levels were really easy. There were a few interesting trainers here, like one with a Jirachi that Flygon can handle no problem, another with all 3 Regis, and that really wasn't too bad. What did cause me an issue though, was Battle 89 against Rich Boy Perk. That sounds like an amazing modern day rapper name or whatever, and while his water team doesn't look too intimidating, it was. Huntail and Gorbis can set up, then pass their stat boost with Baton Pass. Starmie has Ice Beam and Thunderbolt on top of Surf to hit everything on our team super effective, so this battle took a few tries. We still have like 70 continues and only 10 more battles once we get through Rich Boy Perk, so that will definitely be enough, won't it? We finally beat Rich Boy Perk, then we struggle a bit against Fun Old Lady, not to be confused with your mother, then make it to battle 100 against Infin. He has a Kyogre, which he always sends out last, then he picks 2 random Pokemon to lead. Our regular 3 of Flygon, Skarmory, and Tyranitar are the best here, but eventually I realized that Tyranitar is actually our best lead, as we can one-shot his Gardevoir, Altaria, and Crobat with it. Then on Magneton or Aggron, we can just switch to Flygon to be immune to Thunderbolt or Earthquake. This battle was intense and took a lot of continues. We needed some luck, and then we realized that after the second attempt, I could have won if I protected and taught Protect to Skarmory, thanks to Sandstorm damage, but we can't chase movesets now, and it would have been really beneficial as Skarmory had like Air Cutter or something, which I never even went for. I don't even know how many attempts it took, but it got to a point where what we needed to do is we needed Kyogre to be paralyzed from Dragon Breath from Flygon. Then we have to have it be fully paralyzed or miss a Hydro Pump for us to actually win this battle against Infin and then get Ho-Oh. This whole ordeal against Infin alone took about an hour, but finally we paralyzed Kyogre with Flygon, defeat Infin, and then get our 63rd Pokemon Ho-Oh added to our PC. Once getting Ho-Oh, I immediately set up my second GameCube with my copy of Fire Red, trade over Ho-Oh as well as Flygon, so I can finally have Ho-Oh on a cartridge copy of Pokemon, and Flygon was like our MVP, so he deserves it. For now though, let's focus on the elusive 64th Colosseum Pokemon. I don't think elusive is the right word to use there or whatever, but I actually have the Colosseum bonus disc since I got Pokemon Colosseum the day it came out 22 years ago, so I can use my second GameCube with a copy of Ruby that we used for the Zigzagoon videos to send over a Jirachi to it, which we also need for a future video. Yeah, I was serious when I said that all of my videos tied together now that I'm playing on official hardware in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, that's a complete Professor Oak's challenge in Pokemon Colosseum, including Jirachi, all done on official hardware in about 45 hours of game time. Colosseum is a weird game for an Oak's challenge as there's no professor in this game and no Pokedex and works differently, but it was still a ton of fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I wonder what project we'll tackle next now.